My son mailed me a check for $4,100 with the word "came" written on the memo line, and that was the moment I knew he had finally finished hollowing out my life. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the old brass frame holding a sample window in my studio was hollow too. Inside, it was the original notarized contract he swore never existed, and that single piece of metal would be the reason he ended up standing in a courthouse lobby, wearing an orange vest that said "Cracked Trust" across the back, while a judge read his own fraud docket number into the public record. This is the story of how I lost everything to my own son, and how I used 29 years of custodian training to take it all back. My name is Margaret Calloway. For almost 3 decades, I pushed a wide-loop dust mop down the hallways of Lincoln Elementary School, and I knew the exact sound that every single door in that building made when it clicked shut. I raised one son alone after my husband died in a roofing accident, and I put every extra dollar I ever earned into a savings account so that one day I could retire and do the thing I actually loved. That thing was stained glass. I had started learning it in the community college night classes back in the 1990s, and over the years I had gotten good enough to restore a few small windows for the local parish. My son Joseph, he was the one person I trusted with the final shape of that dream. He had a business degree, he wore nice suits, and he talked like he was quoting from a motivational poster every time he opened his mouth. He was the quiet architect of my ruin. The death didn't come in the way you'd think. It wasn't a funeral with flowers and a eulogy. It was a certified envelope that hit my front porch on a wet Tuesday morning. Inside was a stack of documents and a letter from a law firm called Pembroke and Voss. The letter said that my business, Calloway Restoration, had been dissolved. It said that my ex-partner, my son Joseph Calloway, had negotiated a private sale of the company's primary assets to a luxury hotel group for $590,000. Since I had no legal standing in the company, I was entitled to a settlement of $4,100. The memo line on the check read "came." That's it. In stained glasswork, "came" is the metal channel that holds the individual pieces of glass together. It's the skeleton of the window. A $4,100 came check is the kind of joke a man makes when he has absolute power and wants to see if you'll bleed visibly. I stood in my kitchen holding that check, and I did not cry. I did not scream. I just walked out to my little detached garage, which we had converted into a studio, and I found the place hollowed out. The workbenches were still there. The glass grinder was there. But every single finished panel, every restored Tiffany-style lampshade, every sheet of hand-rolled cathedral glass was gone. The only thing left was a small brass sample window, about the size of a legal pad, hanging on a nail by the door. Joseph had left it behind because it was ugly. It was a practice piece where I taught myself how to stretch and bend lead came around sharp corners. The brass frame around it was tarnished and pitted. The vultures circled within the day. Joseph showed up at my door with his wife Danielle, who wore a cream-colored pantsuit and held a designer handbag in the crook of her arm like she was posing for a real estate listing. Joseph didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention the check. He started talking about how he was there to help me transition. He said the house was too much for me now, that I was in shock, that I needed to be around family. Danielle clicked around in her heels and opened my kitchen cabinets without asking, pulling out mugs and inspecting them like she was doing an appraisal. Joseph slid a manila folder across my kitchen table. It was a power of attorney document. It said that due to my advanced age and emotional distress, it was in my best interest to have him handle all of my remaining financial and legal affairs. He said, and I remember this exactly, "Mom, you don't need to worry about the details anymore. Sign this and I'll take care of everything." I told him I needed time. I said I was feeling foggy. He bought it because he wanted to believe I was weak. Then he told me to pack a bag because I was coming to stay with them for a while. Just until I got back on my feet. That's how the manipulation works. They isolate you. They get you under their roof. They make sure the only people you talk to are the people who are already controlling the conversation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a parent's sacrifice should never become a child's springboard. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. So I went. I packed a single suitcase and I left my little house on Cedar Lane. I didn't sign the power of attorney. I just said I'd do it after I rested. And while Joseph was driving me to his 4-bedroom colonial in the Ridgeline subdivision, I kept thinking about that brass sample window. It was the only thing in my studio he hadn't taken. I had grabbed it on the way out the door, pretending it was a sentimental keepsake. Danielle rolled her eyes and said I was bringing junk into her clean house. I didn't care. I had noticed something that stopped my breath the moment I reached for it. When I lifted the frame off the nail, I felt a faint rattle inside the brass channel. Something was loose inside the cane itself. The first night in their guest room while the house was quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. I could hear Joseph on the phone in his office down the hall, but the words were muffled. I took the brass sample window into the tiny ensuite bathroom and locked the door. I laid it flat on the tile counter and examined the corner joints where the brass cane was soldered. One corner had been reheated at some point. The solder was slightly brighter than the other three. I didn't have any of my tools, but I had my hands. 29 years of working in a school teaches you how to improvise. I pulled a bobby pin out of my hair, straightened it, and used the rounded tip to pick at the softened solder joint. It took almost an hour. My fingers were cramping and I was terrified someone would knock on the door. Finally, the end cap popped free with a tiny click. Inside the hollow brass channel was a rolled-up piece of paper no bigger than a cigarette. I slid it out and opened it. It was an original partnership agreement, not a copy, the real one. Signed by me, signed by Joseph, and notarized by a woman named Gloria Hendricks. It stated that Callaway Restoration was a 50-50 partnership between Margaret Callaway and Joseph Callaway. It also included a clause I had almost forgotten I insisted on. The clause said that any sale of the company's restored windows or panels required the notarized signature of both partners. Not one, both, and there was a second clause. It gave the same protection to the original pieces that I had personally restored for St. Anne's Catholic Church. The church chapel windows were not part of the company inventory. They were on permanent loan, and the church retained ownership. That meant Joseph had sold property that didn't belong to him. He had forged my signature on a dissolution document, but he couldn't forge away the existence of this original agreement. And he couldn't forge the provenance of the church windows. Underneath the printed text of the contract, in my own handwriting from 3 years earlier, I had written a note to myself in pencil. It said, "If this goes sideways, check the cane. The frame is hollow, trust no one." I didn't remember writing it. That was the terrifying part. I must have been so paranoid about Joseph's greed that I had hidden the only definitive proof of the partnership inside a structural component of a window that I knew he would never think to sell. He saw junk. I saw the skeleton. At first, the fog was an act, but after 2 weeks in Joseph's house, the fog became a survival mechanism. I played the part of a broken old woman who couldn't remember where she put her reading glasses. I shuffled when I walked. I apologized for being in the way. Danielle treated me like a piece of furniture she was too polite to throw on the curb. Joseph paced around the house with a phone pressed to his ear, talking in short, clipped sentences that he thought I couldn't hear. The escrow is stuck. The bank needs a wet signature. The hotel group is threatening to walk. He was frantic. The sale had been signed, but the money wasn't moving. Something was holding it up, and I had a feeling I knew what it was. The incident that gave me the key happened on a Saturday afternoon. Danielle was hosting a small brunch for the neighborhood ladies, and the kitchen sink suddenly backed up. The water wouldn't drain. She was on the verge of a meltdown because the caterers were arriving in an hour, and her kitchen smelled like raw sewage. Joseph tried to fix it with a chemical drain cleaner he bought at the hardware store, but that just made it worse. He was standing in the kitchen looking at the sink like it was an alien spacecraft. I walked in, looked at the P-trap under the cabinet and said, "I can fix that." Danielle laughed. She actually laughed. I ignored her. I got down on my knees, opened the cabinet and found the 2 slip nuts on the P-trap. I used a pair of kitchen pliers from the junk drawer and a small bucket. I loosened the trap, let the water drain into the bucket and pulled out a wad of hair, grease, and one of those plastic-produced bag twist ties. 10 minutes later, the sink was running clean. Danielle's friends arrived to the sound of water swirling perfectly down the drain. Joseph looked at me like he had never seen me before. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. I just shrugged and said, 29 years of unclogging elementary school toilets. A kitchen sink is nothing. That was the moment the dynamic shifted. I wasn't just a foggy old woman. I was the only person in that house who could fix things, and that gave me a reason to be in places I wasn't supposed to be. A few days later, Joseph asked me to take a look at the bathroom drain on the 2nd floor. It was an excuse to wander the hallway. While I was up there, I noticed that his home office door was partially open. I could see a filing cabinet in the corner with a locking bar across the front. The drawer labels were visible from the hallway. One of them said Callaway Legal. My heart started hammering. I didn't have a key, but I had something better. Back when I worked at Lincoln Elementary, the head custodian was a man named Frank DeLuca. Frank was a retired Navy machinist, and he taught me how to open a filing cabinet without a key. You use a tension wrench and a rake pick. A standard 5-pin office lock is not a bank vault. Frank gave me a small leather case of picks when he retired. I kept it in my purse for 20 years because I never knew when I'd need to get into a supply closet or a teacher's desk drawer. I still had that case. It was the most useful thing Joseph could have let me bring into his house. That night, around 2 a.m, I waited until the house was silent. I put on a pair of cotton gloves, the same kind I used to wear when handling antique glass, and I slipped down the hallway to his office. The door was locked, that was fine. I used the same rake pick on the doorknob. The mechanism opened with a soft click. Inside, the filing cabinet was locked too. I knelt on the carpet, steadied my hand, and worked the pins on the Callaway legal drawer. It took me about 4 minutes. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. When the drawer slid out, I almost gasped. Inside was a stack of documents. There was a forged dissolution of partnership with my signature on it. I stared at that signature for a long time. It looked convincing, but I knew the tells. My own signature has a particular loop on the Y in Callaway, a loop that I lost when I developed arthritis in my left hand. The forged one had the loop. The real me hasn't signed that way in 5 years. There were also deposit slips for accounts in the Cayman Islands. There were invoices from a contractor who had been paid to remove and dispose of the church windows, and there was a promissory note from a hard money lender that listed my house on Cedar Lane as collateral. He had taken out a predatory loan against my house. He had signed my name to that too. The total outstanding debt was over $400,000. He was using my house to finance his disappearance. I didn't take the documents. I photographed every single page with my phone, making sure the lens captured the fine print and the bank logo on the letterhead. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it, locked the drawer, and slipped back to my room. My heart was so loud I thought it would wake the whole house, but no one came. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I realized something. Joseph wasn't just a thief. He was building a case to make me the scapegoat. If the sale fell through, if the lender came calling, if the church discovered their windows were gone, all of it would point back to me. My forged signature was on everything. He had planned this so that if the walls closed in, I would be the one buried in the rubble. The next part of the story is where I found my ally. I didn't go looking for her, she found me. Her name was Clarice Munro. She was a compliance officer at First Meridian Bank, which was the bank where Joseph had tried to deposit the proceeds from the hotel sale. She sent me a certified letter, but Joseph intercepted it. I found the torn envelope in the recycling bin under a stack of Danielle's fashion magazines. The letter inside was gone, but the return address was still visible. I called the number from a prepaid phone I bought at a gas station while Danielle was getting a pedicure. When I told Clarice who I was, she let out a long breath. "Mrs. Callaway," she said, "I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. Your son placed a $590,000 incoming wire on hold. The compliance department flagged it because the underlying asset sale doesn't match the ownership records. We cannot release the funds without a notarized joint authorization from both partners." She paused. "And there's something else. The original partnership agreement you filed with us 3 years ago has a dead man switch clause. It says that in the event of dissolution, fraud, or any attempt to sell the company's assets without both signatures, the ownership of all restored pieces reverts to a trust. That trust is named the Margaret Callaway Integrity Trust, and the sole trustee is you." I almost dropped the phone. I had forgotten about that too. When we first set up the business bank account, I had a lawyer add a protective clause. It was supposed to be a formality. It was supposed to be a just in case. But it was brilliant. The deceased in this story, that's me. I had set the trap 3 years before I ever needed it. The trick was that Joseph had never looked at the bank's copy of the partnership agreement. He had only seen the forged dissolution. He thought he could just explain away the bank's concerns, but the bank's records still showed me as a 50% owner, and the dead man's switch clause meant that any unilateral sale of the company's assets would trigger a freeze and a mandatory fraud review. The money was stuck. The windows were gone, but the money couldn't move without my signature. That's why he was pressuring me to sign the power of attorney. If I signed it, he could use the power of attorney to open the trust and force the bank to release the funds. He would have total control of the money and the trust. And once the money was gone, the house was gone, and the windows were gone. Clarice told me the bank was required to file a suspicious activity report with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, ASAR. Once that was filed, the freeze became an official federal investigation, but she needed me to provide the final piece, the physical original partnership agreement, the one I had inside the hollow brass came, the one with my actual signature and the notary stamp. I told her I had it. She told me to sit tight and let the process play out. Your son is going to try to force the issue, she said. He'll bring you to the bank and try to get you to sign something in person. He'll say it's just a formality. He'll tell you the bank needs to verify your identity. Don't sign. Let him bring you in. I'll have a fraud investigator waiting in the branch office. That was the plan. But before I could get to the bank, I had to survive my own son's cruelty, and he gave me a reason to stop loving him forever. 2 days before the bank meeting, I had an idea. I didn't want to go to the bank and just refuse to sign. I wanted Joseph to expose himself. I wanted him to show the world exactly what he was, so I staged a medical scare. I was alone in the kitchen, and I let myself collapse to the floor. I made sure it looked real. I dropped a ceramic mug, let it shatter, and then I fell. My head missed the counter by 2 inches. I lay there on the tile, completely still, with my eyes half open. It looked like a stroke. I timed it for when Joseph came home from the gym. He walked into the kitchen, saw me on the floor, and instead of rushing to help, he just stopped. He looked at me for a long moment, then he stepped over my body. He stepped directly over my chest and reached for the stack of papers on the kitchen island. The papers were the bank forms from Clarice's letter, the ones he had intercepted and left out on purpose to test if I would sign them. He grabbed them and walked out of the room. He didn't call 911. He didn't check my pulse. He just left me there. I lay on that cold tile for 10 full minutes, and when I knew he was gone, I sat up. I did not cry. I did not shake. I just sat there on the floor of his kitchen, and I let a cold, quiet rage replace every warm memory I ever had of that man. He had stepped over his own mother's body to grab a piece of paper. There was no residual loyalty left to extinguish. The only thing left was the mechanics of his destruction, and I was going to execute them perfectly. The morning of the bank meeting, Joseph drove me to the First Meridian branch on Armitage Street. Danielle stayed home. Joseph was wearing a navy suit and he smelled like expensive cologne. He kept one hand on my elbow like I was a fragile old woman who might wander into traffic. The bank just needs you to sign one form to verify your identity for the trust, he said. It's nothing, just a formality. I nodded and said, okay, Joey, whatever you think is best. I hadn't called him Joey in years. I saw him smile. He thought he had won. Inside the bank, a tall woman in a grey suit met us at the door. She introduced herself as Ms. Vance, a senior fraud investigator. She led us to a conference room on the 2nd floor. The room had glass walls and a long table. Joseph sat down across from her. I sat next to him. He placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Ms. Vance. This is the company resolution authorizing the sale, he said. My mother is here to provide her verbal consent and sign the trust distribution form. Ms. Vance opened the folder and read the document without expression. Then she looked at me. Mrs. Calloway, is this your signature? She turned the page toward me. It was the forged one, the one with the arthritis loop that I no longer used. I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at Joseph. He was staring at me with a tight smile, like he was trying to hypnotize me into compliance. No, I said, that is not my signature. Joseph let out a short laugh. Mom, don't be difficult, you know that's your signature. You signed it in my office 2 years ago. He turned to Ms. Vance. She's been having some memory issues, she gets confused. I remember exactly what I signed 2 years ago, I said. I signed a 50-50 partnership agreement with you, notarized by Gloria Hendricks. And I remember the clause that says any sale of company assets requires both partners' signatures. Notarized, did you bring that document, Joseph, or did you only bring the forgery? His face went pale, his hand twitched on the table. That's ridiculous. The original agreement was lost. We had to file a replacement. The dissolution was filed in good faith. The bank has a copy of it. Ms. Vance pulled a folded piece of paper from her own folder. Mr. Calloway, the bank has a copy of a document you filed 8 weeks ago. It states that the original partnership agreement was destroyed in a moving accident. Is that correct? Joseph nodded. Yes, that's correct. The original was destroyed. Ms. Vance unfolded the paper and turned it so Joseph could see it. It was a photograph of the original partnership agreement, the one from inside the hollow brass came. My handwriting was visible in the bottom margin, the pencil note I had written about checking the came. Joseph stared at it, his mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. You told the bank the original was destroyed, Ms. Vance said. But this document was recovered 2 days ago from inside a brass window frame in your mother's studio. It is the original. It has your signature and hers. The notary stamp is intact, so either you lied to the bank about the destruction of the original, or you are unaware that your mother has kept the original safe from you. Which one is it? Joseph didn't answer. He just sat there, his hands flat on the table, staring at the photograph. Then he said, I want my lawyer. You'll have one, Ms. Vance said. But first I'd like to show you something else. She opened her laptop and turned it toward him. On the screen was a frozen frame from a security camera. It showed a view of a kitchen, Joseph's kitchen. The timestamp was from 2 days earlier. The video started to play. There I was on the floor, surrounded by shattered ceramic, and there was Joseph walking into the frame. He stopped, he looked down, and then he stepped over my body. He reached for the papers and left. The video ended. Ms. Vance closed the laptop. Mr. Calloway, you are being recorded. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. She was reading him his rights. Joseph looked at me, and for the first time in his life I saw fear in his eyes, not regret, fear. The door to the conference room opened and 2 federal agents walked in. One of them was holding handcuffs. Joseph stood up and backed against the wall. This is a mistake, he said. This is an illegal detainment. My mother is elderly and confused. She doesn't know what she's doing. The agent didn't say anything. He just turned Joseph around, pulled his arms behind his back, and clicked the cuffs into place. Joseph was still talking as they led him out of the room. His voice faded down the hallway. You can't do this. The sale is legitimate. The windows are mine. My mother is old. I have rights. I sat in that conference room and I did not move for a long time. Ms. Vance closed her folder and said, Mrs. Calloway, would you like some water? I nodded. She handed me a small paper cup. The water was cold. It tasted like freedom. The aftermath took months. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't happen in a single afternoon. It happens in a steady, grinding procession of court dates, depositions, and asset freezes. First Meridian Bank filed a formal fraud referral to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The SAR flagged the Cayman Islands accounts, and the frozen assets were traced back to Joseph's name. The hotel chain that had purchased the windows was notified that the sale was void. Their legal team filed a civil suit against Joseph personally for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. The church's insurance carrier was brought in, and the recovered windows were located in a storage facility in Phoenix. They had been crated and waiting for a freight shipment to a private collector in Dubai. The serial numbers on the original church ledgers matched the ones on the crates. They were saved. Joseph was charged with felony forgery, grand theft by embezzlement, and elder financial abuse. The federal charges included wire fraud and money laundering. He pled guilty to 2 counts and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Danielle divorced him before the trial was even over. She claimed she had no knowledge of the fraud, but the bank found her name on one of the Cayman banking forms. She ended up with probation and $100,000 in restitution. She had to sell the 4-bedroom colonial and move into a 2-bedroom condo near the airport. My house on Cedar Lane was saved. The predatory loan against it was cancelled as part of the fraud investigation. The lender, a hard money outfit that never did due diligence, had to eat the loss. They tried to fight it, but the original partnership agreement was ironclad. My signature had been forged, and the notary stamp on the original document proved that Gloria Hendricks had been told the parties were signing a legitimate sale agreement, not a theft. Gloria herself provided a sworn affidavit that she had never notarized a dissolution. Joseph had used a forged notary stamp from a different state. The most satisfying part for me was the restitution. The hotel chain, eager to avoid a public relations disaster, returned all of the unsold windows and lampshades. The pieces that had already been shipped were recovered through the FBI's Asset Forfeiture Division. The total value of the recovered property was just under $600,000. Because of the dead man's switch clause, the ownership reverted to the Margaret Calloway Integrity Trust. I was the sole trustee. I had my windows back. I had my studio back. And I had a little over $126,000 in recovered pension funds that Joseph had tried to hide in a shell corporation. All of it came back to me. I reopened the studio on the 1st of the month. I changed the name. The new sign outside reads Pane of Deceit Stained Glass. It's a joke, but it's also a promise. I don't do deceptive work. I work with lead and copper and brass, and I make sure every joint is solid. My son, the man who forged my name and stepped over my body, is not welcome inside the building. But he is not entirely absent either. As part of his restitution order, he was assigned to a work release program. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Marsh, had a sense of poetic justice. She ordered Joseph to complete 500 hours of community service. She said he needed to learn what honest work felt like, and she placed him in my studio. He shows up every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. He wears a high-visibility vest that he is required to keep on at all times. The back of the vest in large block letters says Cracked Trust. That was my idea. He foils the edges of the glass, Foiling is the process of wrapping copper foil tape around the cut edges of each piece of glass before soldering. It's tedious, precise work. His hands shake now. He used to have steady hands when he was signing my name on forged documents. Now he spends hours running his thumb along the edge of a piece of amethyst cathedral glass, pressing the foil down, burnishing it smooth. He doesn't speak unless I ask him a direct question, and when the customers come in they see the vest. They see the number printed on the front, which is his fraud docket number. It's not a punishment I invented. It's the number the federal court assigned to his case. I just made sure it was visible. Every restoration certificate that leaves my shop has a small printed line at the bottom. It says this work was completed under the supervision of Margaret Calloway, Master Glazier. All fraud is recorded in the public docket. See case number 7, 24 CR 00318. The customers don't always understand it, but the lawyers do, the bankers do, the vultures do. I used to think that family meant unconditional love. I thought that if you gave your child everything, they would give you back loyalty. But loyalty is not a debt. It is a choice, and when someone chooses to betray you, they don't get to call it a misunderstanding. They don't get to call it a family dispute. It is a crime, and it deserves a sentence. So now I spend my days in the studio, listening to the whir of the glass grinder and the soft hiss of the soldering iron. I repair the windows that were once stolen. I install new ones in the church chapel. The light comes through them in long streaks of red and blue and gold, and the dust motes float in the air like tiny pieces of broken stars. Joseph sits in the corner with his foil and his vest, and he watches me. He is learning the work he should have learned years ago. He is learning that glass is fragile, but it can cut you if you handle it wrong. He is learning that the skeleton of a window is not the glass but the cane, and the cane is strong because it is not the pretty part. It is the part that holds everything together. I am the cane now. I am the metal channel that holds the pieces of my own life in place, and no one will ever pull me apart again. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one and I want to hear your story. If this video gave you any kind of feeling, hit that like button so more people can see it. Subscribe to the channel if you believe that the people who break the glass don't get to decide where the pieces fall. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp and watch your game.